The first poster child of tokenization was really stablecoins. You saw, as Brian observed, massive growth last year. I think, went from, in 2024, $19 trillion of transactions on stablecoins last year. In 2025 is $33 trillion, so about 75% growth. I think many in our industry would say that's going to continue.
If you hold XRP or any cryptocurrency, you must watch this video until the end. Davos 2026 is all about integrating digital assets into the new financial system. You are about to watch a presentation titled "Is Tokenization the Future?", where Brad Garlinghouse, Ripple CEO, talks about the implementation of digital assets, tokenization of real-world assets. He shared the stage with important figures, just like the governor of the Central Bank of France, François Villeroy, and other leaders from the World Economic Forum. So let's get started.
Brad, on that note, there are lots of sound bites there, lots to respond to. You're already seeing the momentum. First up, tokenized assets on Ripple's XRP ledger surged over 2,200% last year. Just weigh in from your perspective.
Well, I think I agree with a lot of what was said here. I do think the first poster child of tokenization is really stablecoins. You saw, as Brian observed, massive growth last year. I think, went from, in 2024, $19 trillion of transactions on stablecoins last year. In 2025 is $33 trillion, so about 75% growth. I think many in our industry would say that's going to continue. I think to the extent there's space between what Brian was just talking about and how I think about the Bitcoin idea of a Bitcoin standard, I look at that and I think it's much more of the marriage. Sovereignty of fiat currencies, I believe, is for many countries sacrosanct. Ben Bernanke spoke at a Ripple event many years ago, and he made the point that governments will roll tanks into the street before giving up monetary supply, giving up the control of monetary supply, which stuck with me as, yeah, that makes sense. And so at Ripple, we very much focus on building the bridges between traditional finance, as Bill was describing, what we now call TradFi, and decentralized finance. And that has meant working with a lot of the banks around the world to kind of build those bridges.
Governor, you have to address this. Is the euro in danger from a Bitcoin standard?
No, I'm a bit skeptical, Brian. Sorry to say it about this idea of the Bitcoin standard. We left the gold standard, but the gold was only a technical mean. What is important is what you say, Brad, that monetary policy and money is part of sovereignty. And we live in democracies, and I think the public role is key.
Element of trust, but there's also an element of momentum. We're seeing it in terms of the swing away to gold, which is now just a momentum trade as trust is eroded. Brad, do you want to come in on this and the element of trust?
Well, I certainly think momentum is a big part of this. And I think, frankly, I personally think the crypto environment, and stablecoins included, and even tokenization, momentum is so much on our side of that direction. And that's partly because you're seeing the U.S., the largest economy in the world, has been pretty openly hostile towards facets of crypto and blockchain technologies, and that has shifted dramatically, starting with the White House, but certainly, the work that the industry based in the U.S. has come together and helped elect a much more pro-crypto, pro-innovation Congress, and you're seeing that play out. So I think momentum is a big part of this, and continuing to make sure that we're playing into that in a nice way, but also demonstrating real results. Because, look, if this is just hype, I think part of the tokenization topic, the main topic today, part of that is we shouldn't tokenize everything just to tokenize something. There has to be a positive outcome of efficiency or transparency or, some of the root benefits of being tokenized. Otherwise, it's just okay, it's a nice science experiment.
I'm surprised no one's throwing democratization of the market to me. And that's typically the argument when we have some sort of innovative approach to an asset class. Brad, come in on this because you're the innovator in the room, but you also believe in regulation.
Yeah, I think what's going on in the U.S. right now it is a classic dynamic of when you create new law, it's never going to be perfect. And, I think what's the dynamic within the industry and working with Congress has been I subscribe to the idea that perfection is the enemy of good, and you can't get to perfection. And so I think Brian's exactly right. We're as close as we've ever been in providing that clarity. As some in the room probably know, Ripple lived through a 5-year battle with the U.S. government being sued because of the lack of clarity. So we are very much an advocate of clarity is better than chaos. Again, I think Brian's right. We are very close. I don't know if we
What about
stalled
the rewards side? Rewards, dividends, interest. Is it necessary on stablecoins?
Ripple doesn't have as much of a dog in that fight as others in the industry. And so there's others that have stronger opinions. It doesn't directly affect Ripple's business as much. I agree in some ways that, look, competition is good. And I agree very much with the idea of level playing field. Now, I also think a level playing field goes two ways, in that crypto companies should be held to standards that banks are, and banks should be held to standards that crypto companies are in order to compete. So I don't think that's a one-way street, that somehow Team Crypto gets to have a certain pass in some way.
Is that one for you?
Sure. I'll comment briefly. Not all layer one blockchains are created equal. Some use, as you're describing, proof of work. Some use proof of stake. Some use other consensus models. So I wouldn't uniformly put all of the kind of blockchain infrastructure in kind of one power lens. And so I don't think it's as big as a deal. And what you're seeing is most of the activity of stablecoins today is on more power efficient blockchains, either use proof of stake or a consensus mechanism.
Just to add to that, proof of stake uses 99.9% less energy than proof of work,
right?
Which most of the tokenization is happening on Ethereum blockchain, which uses proof of stake.
Now, I'm going to touch on that. Does it provoke more speculation in asset classes, and where does that leave the average owner?
Well, you're choosing the word speculation. I subscribe to Brian Armstrong's comment earlier of opening up investment access, and investment versus speculation. I put in kind of two different buckets. They both have a purpose, and they both have active market participants. But I think the opportunity around tokenization for certain verticals is, in fact, the democratization of access to investment, less so on the speculation side. I don't know enough about Trump's decision to make steps towards banning institutional investment in residential real estate to comment there. But I do think if you want economic exposure, investment exposure to a commercial building in Miami, and you have $10,000 US, you can't do that today. And I think opening that up, and I know Brian's example is even better because it's the many billions of adults who don't have any access. My example is not perfect for that, but you get the point.
They are projecting an economy where people don't even have access to real estate. It comes to a point where the average person simply can't afford real estate anymore. Take 100 square meter property in the center of London, tokenize each meter square into 100 different tokens, and then instead of selling the whole property, which is unaffordable for the majority of people right now with the current economic circumstances, each person can then afford a token, which is a fractionalized ownership of the underlying property. This is just one example of what tokenization of real-world assets looks like in the real world. Of course, you can tokenize anything of value on the XRP ledger, which also has the first ever built-in DEX that's operating since 2012. And here is what a lot of people are not understanding. XRP's role is beyond cross-border payments and moving value. XRP is a financial weapon. XRP is the plumbing of the new financial system. The whole infrastructure is going to run on top of the XRP ledger and a few selected group of blockchains just like Stellar, Hedera, which happens to be a hash graph, and a few others. On Davos 2026, it was also said that globalization is coming to an end. Let's now watch this video, and then I'm going to break down the practical implications of the end of globalization for digital assets and specifically what that means for XRP.
Well, I think you should start at a much higher level. Okay. We are in Davos at the World Economic Forum. And the Trump administration and myself, we are here to make a very clear point. Globalization has failed the West and the United States of America. It's a failed policy. It is what the WEF has stood for, which is export, offshore, far shore, find the cheapest labor in the world, and the world is a better place for it. The fact is, it has left America behind. It has left the American workers behind. And what we are here to say is that America First is a different model, one that we encourage other countries to consider, which is that our workers come first. We can have policies that impact our workers. Sovereignty is your borders. You're entitled to have borders. You shouldn't offshore your medicine. You shouldn't offshore your semiconductors. You shouldn't offshore your entire industrial base and have it be hollowed out beneath you. You should not be dependent for that which is fundamental to your sovereignty on any other nation. And if you're going to be dependent on someone, it darn well better be your best allies. Okay? And so that is a different way of thinking. It is completely different than the WEF. I viewed the WEF as not a flagpole in the middle, but in fact, they are the flag. Whichever way the wind blew, so it blew. You should have solar, you should have wind. Why are you going to do solar and wind? Why would Europe agree to be net zero in 2030 when they don't make a battery? They don't make a battery. So if they go 2030, they are deciding to be subservient to China, who makes the batteries.
First, let me get this straight. I don't trust any of those globalists from the World Economic Forum. It's very clear they lost trust of the global population and now they are trying to make sense for the first time in ages. I'm not falling for that. Now let's get back to XRP. The end of globalization and the loss of trust in the global financial system leads to the adoption of XRP across the world. For decades, people trusted the traditional financial system without questioning its motivations, who was behind it, and what are the financial incentives behind the global agenda. Banks simply trusted each other to settle value. Countries trusted settlement layers to remain neutral. Everyone trusted the dollar, pre-funded accounts, and systems like SWIFT to function without discrimination. That trust-based system is now completely falling apart. Assets are now being frozen across borders without warning. Sanctions are now being utilized as direct economic weapons. Money is no longer neutral, just like the US dollar has been weaponized against other nations. If funds can be frozen or seized just because of politics, it means the system is completely broken. Once trust disappears, the entire financial system risks collapsing. At the same time, and as described by the World Economic Forum, globalization is coming to an end. The cycles are repeating and the world is once again fragmenting into different competing blocks. The US dominance versus BRICS nations is no longer theory. Europe is weakening economically and politically, and countries are moving towards monetary sovereignty. Trade is becoming bilateral instead of global. Geopolitical tensions and friction when it comes down to settling down cross-border payments are increasing exponentially. This creates a harsh and scalable problem for global trade. If countries do not trust each other, value movement becomes extremely difficult. Settlement cannot rely on the currency or banking system of a rival nation. This means there is no efficient bridge between fragmented financial systems. And this is where XRP fits in the picture. XRP is a permissionless system that removes the necessity of trust between nations or financial institutions. The network simply doesn't have a political bias, and neither it has been issued by any single entity. In fact, in the world of traditional finance, currencies that start with an X, just like XRP and XLM, stands for the fact that this currency has not been issued by any specific nation. XRP settles value with almost zero cost across completely different currencies and systems. There are no correspondent banks involved. XRP removes the necessity for pre-funded accounts. In other words, XRP is capable of replacing nostro-vostro accounts. XRP functions as a neutral bridge layer. It exists as a middle infrastructure that belongs to no single country or power structure. In a world where trust has fallen apart, efficiency becomes the only priority. Countries do not need to like each other. They only need payments to clear, settle, and become final. XRP removes counterparty risk, delays, and political interference from the movement of money itself. This is exactly why XRP was not meant for retail investors. This is the infrastructure that is set to power the entire financial system. And this is why XRP is not a speculative play. Forget meme coins, forget speculation. XRP is real-time infrastructure. Nations across the globe are actively trying to ditch the US dollar as a global reserve currency. However, they do not want to use each other currencies either. They still require fast and reliable settlement mechanisms. They need a neutral asset that is no debt, no national, and not controlled by any centralized authority. That is the type of environment that perfectly matches XRP's role. XRP is definitely not a national currency tied to any government. XRP operates as a settlement tool designed for efficiency. And in that environment, XRP becomes a structural necessity. XRP adoption does not depend on retail investors or speculation. In fact, its adoption depends on the failure of the current financial system. And that failure, ladies and gentlemen, has already begun to unfold just in front of us. Now, if you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments, are you bullish about XRP's integration into the new financial system? And I remind you, if you want to trade crypto without KYC, I'm going to drop a link in the description of this video for the exchange partner of this channel. It's called Bitunics Exchange. You can withdraw up to $500,000 per day without KYC. You can also buy spot XRP and withdraw to a cold wallet while remaining anonymous. If you are one of the real ones who made this to the end of this video, let me know in the comments. I'm going to see you in the next video. Thank you, everyone.